can't see that I'm smiling.
Welcome, John Curtis, Congressman Curtis,
Thank you, Mayor.
to Moab. We're so grateful that you're here. This was a last-minute town hall that you were willing to do because you were in town. I want to thank you so much for always being available to Moab. Thank you so much for representing us. Thank you to Lori for organizing with us to put this together so quickly. Again, I'm so grateful to you for being willing to do town halls and talking and listening to us. It's so valuable. We are in a rural and remote community, and this kind of representation matters. So thank you so much, and welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to return the favor and compliment you because I just really enjoy coming here. Your mayor is always very encouraging, and thank you. And thank you for putting this together on such a quick basis. So for those that don't know, we had an opportunity to deliver 20,000 masks to the Navajo Nation. And we put that, really. They were donated by, it was the Chamber of Commerce, the Taiwan Chamber of Commerce and
Economic Development Office of the Taiwan Embassy in San Francisco.
And so we drove them down today and delivered those. And since we were down here, I wanted to take advantage of this. It's been a little too long since I've been down here on an official capacity. And we're just really delighted to be here. And thank you, Mayor.
Well, thank you so much. And for those of you that are watching via YouTube, hopefully you can have the same experience that we are having here. And I do want to say that if you have a question, you're going to have to send it pretty quickly because we're only together for about an hour.
Yep.
But the email address to send it to is?
Lori, L-O-R-I-E .Falk, F as in Frank, O-W-L-K-E @mail.house.gov.
Could
Good
it
enough.
possibly be more complicated?
All right.
Thanks, John.
Yeah. All right. And if you're watching, we've taken great precautions here to get me far enough away. I can take my mask off, so I'm going to take it off so that I can answer the questions just a little better. And so delighted to be here. I feel like I know those that are here and have gotten to know you. And we'll start with your questions, just really informal and casual. And then if people have emailed questions in, we'll try to get to those as well. Mayor, do you have a question?
I have a question. I just wanted you to tell us a little bit about your decision on your vote regarding the ERA.
That's a great question. We literally could spend all hour on that. And I'd love to give you just a little bit of background on that. And thank you for bringing it up. It came before Congress, it's been several months ago, to vote on giving states more time to ratify the ERA. And so it was important to kind of notice the distinction between giving the states more time and actually voting on the ERA. If that makes sense, it was a different vote. But I sat down and, to be honest, remembered that my mother actually lobbied against the ERA in the 70s. And so my natural instinct was to vote against this. And started to get a little bit challenged by some women in my district who really challenged me to rethink this from a 2020 perspective instead of a 1970s perspective. And my staff then got challenged by me because my staff was recommending a no vote. And so I then challenged them to say, well, let's dig a little deeper on this vote. And I think a real pivotal thing was a woman that I have a lot of respect for said, go home tonight and read the amendment and then make your decision. And I had not read the amendment before that. And I don't know if the people listening have read the amendment, but the amendment simply says, and now I'm paraphrasing, I can't remember exactly, is that women should be treated equal. And we have overcomplicated, in my mind, that whole issue. And we bring in all sorts of things into this. And to me, it became as simple as, should women be treated equal? And of course, they should. And so that day I cast my vote. I think I was one of 2, maybe 3 Republicans to actually vote for it. And it was actually, I'm gonna say, a very fun thing to do because I kind of like going against the grain. And I was really happy with my vote. And I've been happy ever since. With my vote. And I actually believe some people felt like the ERA went against some of Utah's values, and I refuse to accept that treating women equal would be going against Utah's values. And that's kind of where I ended up. So thank you, Mayor, for bringing that up. And it's one of those votes, some votes, like I just really, after I vote, I worry about whether I cast the right vote. And this was one I haven't had a moment's regret about whether or not I cast the right vote on.
Follow-up though.
Okay.
You and I disagreed about a recent vote with the Great Outdoors Act.
Yeah. So the Great Outdoors Act is I'm gonna lump two things into it that it mostly did, and it's not nearly that simple. But one was the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and the other was the backlog in our national parks and getting them funded. And it's important, I think, for people to know that I have voted for both of those things, but it was the way that they were funded through this bill that I found difficult. And that was, in essence, to take them, basically what we did when we passed this is we took it out of Congress's hands and put it into perpetual spending without Congress being able to approve that. And my analogy is if somebody said to you as mayor, you'll never be able to change the way parks are funded in your city, you would struggle with that. Not that you don't support parks, but so really for me it was more that than whether I disagree with what it was accomplishing. Yeah, the perpetual spending. Man, tough questions from the mayor. Of course, I am in Moab, and I've learned to expect tough questions in Moab. Good, yes.
I have a couple of questions, and it's more to do with the federal government and working with local authorities with outdoor recreation. Your predecessor, Jason Chavis, introduced a bill called in the 115th Congress, it was House Bill 622. And what it was basically would eliminate some positions, law enforcement, the BLM, and Forest Service, and replace them with local sheriffs. In this bill, there was a mechanism in place that would allow the local sheriff to calculate how much time he spent servicing calls on public lands, and at the end of the year, the federal government would reimburse local counties for that cost. As it stands right now, the local sheriff basically performs these law enforcement duties. Just so you know this, the BLM has 3 field districts in your district. You have 2 law enforcement officers represented. So 100% of the search and rescue calls are generally answered by the local sheriff. And our sheriff is amazing, probably one of the most competent sheriffs in the country, and he knows the backcountry. The problem is the local taxpayers are paying for that enforcement problem. And House Bill 622 really took care of that well. And I was just hoping if you could dig it up and maybe find out what was issue with it, maybe somehow represent it.
It's a great suggestion, and I'm familiar with the concept, but not that specific bill. So certainly we'd be happy to dig it up.
I looked up 622.
622.
It's a different bill.
Okay.
It was from the
115th, 622.
It was Jason Chavis, and
Yeah.
Representative Stewart was on it too.
And I'll let you ask your other question, but maybe if I can comment on this just quickly. There are a number of interactions with all this public land we have. We have 4 counties here that are over 90% federal land. And as you well know, everybody in this room knows, there's a lot of conflict between local and federal government.
There is?
Yes, there is.
We've got some work to do.
Yeah. A lot of that conflict would go away if there was the appropriate compensation for federal land. We do pretty well with forest fires in compensating local government when they fight fires on federal land. But we don't in every category. And PILT payments, I can just get a little closer.
They said
Okay.
that it's hard to hear, so
Good.
we're just gonna get closer.
Okay, and PILT payments are a really good example where the federal government is paying for this land, but it's not as much money as if it were in private hands. And think about this, we just came from San Juan County this morning. 90% of it's federal land. That means 92%. That means 8% is paying for schools, parks, police, fire, and all the services that generally come from property tax. And I think we could really de-escalate this conflict if the federal government was kind of paying its share, and in this case, you mentioned search and rescue. I don't know the numbers.
It's not so much the search and rescue.
Yeah, oh, but law enforcement. Search and rescue is a component underneath that. But you're right, it's broader than just search and rescue. I know the reason search and rescue came to mind is I've heard Emery County tell me it's about $500,000 annually for their search and rescue budget. And they just don't have the funds for that.
And there's from the search and rescue point of view, there is a mechanism to pay for their services. Same with EMS, because they're all kind of tied together, EMS, search and rescue, but the local sheriff. There's no reimbursement for the law enforcement arm of that. And the way I see it, the sheriff's the first person there and the last guy to leave. Because he has to manage the situation. So it's his time and money that is my concern.
It sounds like Jason's done all the work. I'd be delighted to dig it up and look at it. So great suggestion. You had a second one? Yep.
Just the second part to this, and I know this has been discussed too, and you may be aware of this, but the state of Utah has been the federal government has been out of compliance with the state of Utah since the first moment they took a fee for recreational use, whether it be for a permit, an entrance fee, or a camping fee. This is a local tax that is the sales tax and the transient room tax, which is the incomes that directly help local counties. It has never been collected. State parks, as in Dead Horse Point, they collect sales tax and they collect transient room tax. We are inundated with public campsites around us. I think it's about 700-800. We're been paying for the mitigating all the impacts on us, and we don't have any sort of tax. And this would take an act of Congress to change it, and I realize this, but there's a lot of counties that are in the same position as us. We're struggling financially right now, burdened with all this federal land on us, without the fiscal responsibilities of making it work for us. And we're the first county to kind of go through this too, so we're experiencing this that no other county's gone through this, so we're just saying, hey, we need help.
I hear you, and I'm an advocate. I totally agree. It's part of this concept of the federal government paying their fair share of owning these public lands. I'm an advocate on that fee point. Yeah, good. For those of you that just joined us, welcome. We've got some on YouTube. We've got some that we've been invited. I don't know if they've actually done it, to email some questions in, and so we may rotate back and forth, but we want a pretty casual environment here. I'm going to ask the chair. You raised your hand, but I'm going to try to get to all of you before it's over.
I know there's. And I'm going to interrupt for a second because if you want to speak a little bit more than just a question, we do have a microphone. Or when you get a question, will you
try to repeat it?
Because
yep.
YouTube land can't hear anything that we say.
Good point. I also, from having done a lot of these, realize that some people don't really have a question, but they have something they want me to hear. And I think it's easier just to tell me and not pretend it's a question. Does that make sense? And so I'm happy. I'm happy to take comments, and you don't have to worry about turning it into a question.
So, Laurie, we can use that.
Yeah.
I heard there's some movement on increasing the amount of help money that we. I want to know if you know of any movement and what's happening. That's question number one, and then I have one more.
Okay, I'm going to repeat the question. The question is there a movement underway to increase PILT payments? Quickly, if you're not familiar with the PILT payment, that's the federal government's version of property tax, payment in lieu of taxes that they pay on the land. Mary, I'm aware of a lot of talk, but I wouldn't actually call it a movement. It mostly comes from Western states who have this problem. States in the East have very small portions of federal land. They might have a park of 100 acres or 200 acres. So we don't get a lot of sympathy from them. And I think one of my missions is to help my colleagues who don't have a lot of public lands simply understand the dynamics of public lands in a state. And so I think it's fair to say our entire delegation is very committed to getting those PILT payments to be in line with what's appropriate for them to be, which is a strong feeling it's more than they are. But to get a movement, we've got to get more of my East Coast colleagues really understanding the dynamics of them.
So that's one way we need help.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The other question or concern is the lowering of the royalties on oil. It has hit us really hard. For instance, I'm on solid waste special service district, and we're getting next to nothing. And that was the mineral waste money was something we were pretty dependent on, and lots of organizations are pretty dependent on that mineral. And it's pretty much been wiped out because of the lowering of royalties.
the question is, the royalties on oil and gas leases have gone down, and is there a chance of getting those back? There's always a chance, but I can just tell you that overall, any revenue coming from fossil fuels is decreasing. And that's coming not just from the decrease in percentages, but the overall use of these fossil fuels is decreasing. And it seems to be the trajectory, regardless of politics or anything that are involved in it. And so I would probably say to those who have had this, and there's a lot, especially in my rural parts, that this is where we need to really start focusing on diversifying the revenue sources and the economy, because whether or not we increase or decrease those percentages, that revenue is still going to trend downward.
Is there a possibility of creating a new mineral lease for renewable energies? Like if you were to use a lot of solar in your county or your district, there was potentially a new mineral lease money that would help counties?
Yeah, the question is there, and I know this sounds awkward for me to repeat your questions, but we're trying to do it for YouTube here. The question is there a chance of creating a similar model with renewables? And the answer is yes, but the pressure is just the opposite, because we're trying to incentivize and not overburden those with revenue generated. And so we're actually moving, kind of more in the opposite direction, which is subsidizing those, because we're trying to encourage them. Now, solar, you mentioned solar. Solar is a really good example of something that we have incentivized. And for a while, the prices were climbing, and solar has just dropped and is one of our cheapest sources right now of energy. And so it may be that as it cycles, going through from needing an incentive to getting to where it's standing on its own, to where it can actually sustain some revenue generated. I think it is a possibility, but because of that cycle, we're just not quite far enough along in that cycle with renewables. Good. Yeah.
During Howard's previous question, you had alluded to the costs associated with fighting forest fires, and of course, wildfires and fires here in the area west are really, looking at us straight in the eye. And I think a lot about preventative measures and any prevention that we could take. And it's my understanding, and I might be corrected, that as a local government, we're required to issue sales permits to fireworks vendors. And that's just one thing that it was brought to my attention that perhaps something your office could work on in terms of giving us the autonomy to not issue.
The question is, we're worried about forest fires, and a lot of forest fires are actually caused, we know this, by fireworks and things, and local governments are really very constrained in having to offer permits and things like that. And one of my favorite questions is one where I get to say, that's your state, not your federal government. And having been a mayor, I know your frustration, because the state would mandate to us periods of time when we couldn't ban fireworks, and we had to sell permits in certain areas. And that's coming from the state and not the federal government. And so the response would be, let's work with our state officials on those mandates. I don't mind telling you, there's a really strong lobbying at the state level for fireworks. We had a pet that didn't do well with fireworks at all, and I didn't like them at all. And as a mayor, I was constrained to have them in my city at certain times and in certain locations and things. They do give you an ability, as you interface with forests and public lands, to ban them in certain areas, but I don't know the exact specifics of that. Good. In the back, anybody, or do we have anything online, Lori, that we want to answer?
Just the communications manager who says they want to hear the questions.
So. Okay, and hopefully we're doing a good job. Yes, sir.
I have a question.
You bet.
At the start of COVID, my wife is an elementary school teacher. She went home. She had her telephone number forwarded to her personal phone. She fielded questions from her students and the students' parents. And at that time, when I call your office, you go straight to voicemail. Now here it is 6 months later. I haven't been able to call your office and speak to staff for 6 months. I tried calling today, straight to voicemail.
So if my wife can handle getting her calls forwarded to her during this time of crisis, why can't you and your staff receive our calls so you can hear what we're thinking? And I'd also like to know if you support this president 100%, and is he the kind of guy that you tell your grandson, yes, be like him when you grow up?
So I'll answer those two separately, and hopefully the audience heard it because the microphone was there. First of all, let me applaud your wife and tell her thank you. I think that the school teachers fit into that hero category with COVID, and they've been doing a wonderful job. My staff initially was not allowed to go into the office. It's controlled by Nancy Pelosi, and she sets the rules. Since we were allowed, we're rotating our staffs in, obeying all the rules, and we are answering the phones when we come in. Perhaps a little bit of the difference between what your wife gets and what we get is it's not unusual for us to get hundreds of calls a day, and we have a very limited staff, and we try to answer them the best we can. The best way I can answer that is I'm here in person to answer your questions today, and I'm happy to do that.
0 phone calls in 6 months, I've been able to get through. That's 0.
No, we do answer quite a few calls. Lori, do you want to tell them a little bit about the district office?
Yeah, I'm the head of the district office, and we do answer calls and we return calls. Huh? You'll have to talk for DC.
No, we answer those as well there too. We don't have a full staff there. We're not allowed to. The offices are actually closed by Speaker Pelosi, and there's very limited access into our offices. It's not our choice. My staff is amazing, and they would love to be there answering your calls, and we try to get to as many as we can. It's a high priority for us. Your second question, I'm going to paraphrase it because it's just a little unclear in my mind. In essence was, do I support the president 100%? The answer to that is I don't know anybody on the planet I support 100%. Now my wife, I'll take an exception on that. We're about 99% on that, but there's nobody that I support 100% politically. And no, it's not somebody that I'm going to say to my grandson, that's who you want to be like. Okay. Other questions? In the back? Well, okay. Yes, go ahead.
What do you think the U.S. response should be? Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry for the awkwardness there, but we don't want to pass the microphone. Right.
What do you think the U.S. response should be to the Russian bounty on U.S. service members and
Yeah. It should be infuriating. It should be sanctions. I mean, it should be all out. There's no place for that. There's no acceptance of that. And absolutely, it's unacceptable. Yeah.
Congressman, I find that response very encouraging. Can we hear more of that from you?
And I'm sorry, I'm gonna make you start over because even I couldn't hear the full question. Lori's not gonna let you hold that mic.
I'm trying to figure out the rules here. Sorry. I find that response very encouraging.
The President Trump response?
Yes, about the bounties on U.S. service. Would it be possible to hear more, to hear publicly from you more on issues like that, where you say disagree or have a strong position that might run counter to the administration? Because I get frustrated that at times we don't hear as much where you might disagree.
Can I give you kind of a long answer on that?
Absolutely.
I don't mind telling you it's not something I've perfectly figured out, but let me tell you the journey, if that makes sense. This is not, it may be newsworthy, but I don't think it's newsworthy because I've talked about it a lot. I didn't vote for President Trump and have struggled with a lot and actually find some things I support as well. I think the biggest problem that I have is that if I woke up in the morning and said, okay, what has President Trump done that I disagree with, and I'm going to make a public statement on it, that is all I would do. And let me give you a really good example. On one of our last trips down here, we were trying to build a relationship with some of the Native American tribes dealing with Bears Ears. And I've really developed a fond relationship with the Hopi tribe, and the vice chair there and I have become really good friends. And he invited me on a hike, and we were down in San Juan County, and we went on a hike, and he actually invited me to be part of the ceremony that we were part of. It was a really cool moment, and I think really went a long ways to building some trust that needs to be built down there. I had some of my DC staff with me. I'm guessing 3 or 4 members of the DC staff, most of my Utah staff with me. And I don't remember the specific issue, but there was something that day that we questioned whether we should have responded to. But my choice was to pull off everything I was working on that day, sit down with my team, craft a statement, get it out and respond to that, or to go with the Hopi chairman. And I simply bring that up to point out it's not always as simple as, why aren't you making a statement on this? Because literally, that's all I would do. And there are members of Congress who get consumed with that. And that, if that's fine, if that's what they went to Congress to do. But I didn't. I went to Congress to resolve Bears Ears, to resolve Emory County, to work with the NAP. I mean, just a whole litany of things that we want to do. And so what I've done, and the policy that I follow in my office is when the president does something that is just clearly either in harmony or out of harmony with the district, and it goes both ways. When it clearly crosses a line, we will stop what we're doing no matter what it is, and we'll make a statement and get it out there. Now, I have found this. Rarely is that statement seen as adequate. Those who are really opposed to the president never feel like I'm hard enough or strong. I mean, I don't think I can. I think I could jump up on this table, pound my chest, and it still wouldn't be right enough. And so I'm just telling you right up front that some things I say you're going to be disappointed with. But another dynamic that is unfortunate is, I hate to admit this because I'm a really proud guy, but if you're John Curtis, you're one of 435 votes, and the press just doesn't care about me that much. And so a lot of times we do make statements and it goes out to kind of an empty audience. And if you don't know where to look for it, it's not seeing it. So it's not that I'm not saying it, it's that nobody really cares. Now, to be honest, if you're Mitt Romney, boom, it's picked up and it's national news. And I can say the exact same thing, and it just doesn't go anywhere because people don't care as much. Yeah, you can go to the website and get it there. But here again, and there's a million ways to make statements. Right, like sometimes it's a tweet, it's just as simple as a tweet, but sometimes, you know what, we're pulling all the stops out, we're going big on this. I'm putting an op-ed in the paper, and so it goes in all these different levels. Let me give you, and I told you I was going to give you a long answer, so I hope you're okay with a little bit longer answer. Let me give you a really good example. I think an obvious one to all of us was the children at the border issue some time ago. Clearly out of harmony with my district, with Utah's values. Way over the line, right? And an easy one to do. And for me, a tweet wasn't enough, right? This is a big deal. And so what do I do? And we brainstormed as a staff. And these things literally, I mean, it can take hours to talk about these things and pulling the staff together and how do we respond appropriately to something like that. And we determined I needed something bigger than normal. And what I really wanted to do was to tell the president personally that it was against the grain of my district. Well, this won't surprise you. I'm not on a telephone relationship with the president. Some are. I'm not. And some of the reasons I'm not, you picked up because of the way I've expressed myself today. But I found out he was coming to speak to the Republican conference, something, I've been there 3 years, he's only done once. And so I had this unique little window when he was coming to speak to about 200 congressmen. It was all the Republicans. So I went to that meeting. Won't surprise you that he was surrounded by my peers who wanted their picture with him and wanted, all of these things. And I was having a super hard time finding a way to connect with him. And so I did what was the next best thing. General Kelly at the time was his chief of staff, and nobody was paying attention to him. So I went over to General Kelly, and I reached out, I shook my hand, I said, I'm John Curtis, I'm from Utah. Can I just tell you that this children at the border thing is really out of harmony with my district? You just need to know that. He said, thank you, I'll convey that. And then I saw Kirsten Nilsson, who at the time was a Secretary of Health and Human Services, and she was being left in the room. So I went up to her and I repeated exactly what I did. Well, it just so happened that because I had taken these moves, I found myself on the outside of the doorway of the room where everybody was and where the president was, and son of a gun, he had to exit through that door. So it was a single doorway, and as he came through, grabbed him by the hand, shook his hand, and said, Mr. President, I just need to tell you that this is really out of harmony with Utah's values. And I felt really good about that, right? I felt, okay, today I've checked that box of speaking up for my district and representing them. And I want you to know that I take that very seriously. And it's not just the president, it's anybody who is out there, particularly in my sphere, in elected office, in on a federal level, where I feel that's part of my responsibilities of representing this district. It's just not always easy, and it's not always cut and dry as well. And I've spent a long time on this answer because I do want you to know I take it very seriously, and it is an important thing to me. And I will continue to refine my approach in how I speak and the manner in which I speak to try to represent the district. And I don't mind telling you that there are obvious exceptions to this, but generally the tone that I'm sensing from you is not just a Moab tone. It spreads throughout much of my district, right? And not completely, and I have to be careful because I represent everybody, but that's kind of where I'm at. I'm sorry for that very, very long answer. Hopefully that was helpful. Yeah. Mayor? Oh, okay, we'll go to Mary and then over to the mayor. Oh, Mary held the mic. Mary, now we gotta have to go sanitize it.
I just wanted to comment that not only did you come tell the president, you also wrote that incredible letter that the mayor read when we had our march.
That's right.
He wrote a letter with stating publicly that he was very angered by the separation of children at the border. So I've seen you do just that.
Yeah, and I'll tell you that took, that whole thing was a major deviation from our agenda. In that case, it was worth it, but that's why you don't always hear from me. Mayor.
Okay, so I love working with your staff. They actually have been very responsive. So if anyone wants to get in touch with staff or have a longer conversation, I'm accessible for that as well. I also really enjoy working with Senator Lee's staff and have said before that I find that Senator Lee has some of the most incredible people working on his staff. You made a statement. You're, one of a big bucket full of representatives, and senators do get more attention. And I watch how people use power, and you have always used your power to work with us. And just like Mary illustrated with writing the letter, with the way in which you represent us. And here's the deal. I'm a mom, and I'm an environmentalist, and I'm a feminist. And I will say that the mom and the environmentalist part in me was embarrassed by Senator Lee's mocking of the Green New Deal on the Senate floor. Because even if we don't agree on how to get there, we all know that we should. You having been the mayor of Provo and seeing the air quality, you get it. You biked down to talk about air quality. That's part of the environmental, picture that we're, trying to create and paint with facts. So Oscar, is here with us today. And as a mom, I want to ask you this really specific question. How can we work together on environmental policy? Because I don't feel like we're finding common ground, even though we all know we have to find it.
I'm so delighted you asked that question because this is as if it was planted. I gave a speech, it's been a little over a week ago at the Sutherland Institute on this very topic. And at the Sutherland Institute.
What Sutherland Institute?
Sutherland is a think tank that would be considered very conservative in the state. And the title of the talk was Confessions of a Climate Conservative. And I spent 20 minutes. The Tribune did a very good write-up, and if you've read it in the Tribune, I'm pleased. But if you really have 20 minutes, I'd really encourage you to go to Sutherland's website, because I tackled this problem of that we got these two extremes, and we're not here working on solving real-life problems dealing with the climate, and that's wrong. And I basically called out both sides and told them what their problems were, and my ideas of how we come together to work on this. And for instance, one of those that I called out my Republican friends on was, you've got to stop calling us a hoax, all right? Just stop. And to be fair, on my criticism on the other side is, you've got to stop using shame and crisis and fear, right, as your motivating tool. It's just not motivating. I know this is hard on a lot of people, but science is the major tool used by those in favor of climate change in convincing people to get on board, and it's not working. Who has ever been convinced by science? Right? The climate is the reason that I'm committed to take care of the climate is emotional. It's not science. And so you've got to appeal to Republicans on the emotion side. And the emotion side is this: do you want to leave the earth better than you found it? You name me one person, no matter where they are politically, that's going to say no to that, and you've got a weirdo, right? We all want to leave the earth better than we found it. And I believe part of the problem is we're asking the wrong question. And what is the question we ask? You all know it. Is the climate changing, and is man influencing it? And that's about like me saying to this group, how do you feel about the wall? Right? Because if I say the wall, do you not immediately, right, tighten up and okay, well, it's the same thing. And so it's a terrible way to begin the conversation. And that's how the conversation always begins when you're confronting a Republican. What I learned as a Republican is, if you don't say yes, you don't get a seat at the table. So I stopped dodging the question. And part of my criticism of the right is, you've got to stop dodging the question. Right? Answer it. The climate's changing. We can see that. Is it at all possible that decades and decades and decades of the Industrial Revolution has influenced that climate? That's not that hard to go with me on that, right? And then you get a seat at the table, right? And so what's happened is, because the Republicans don't like the way they're approached with it, they go over here. Because the Democrats, and I'm sorry I'm stereotyping these groups, but I think you all understand the stereotypes. Because the Democrats like this litmus test so much, that's always what they go. They don't have anything better, right, to go with to try to get people on board. So in my speech, I spent a fair amount of time identifying that problem and what my suggestions are for bringing us together in the middle to talk about this. I will tell you that as a Republican, I can see the climate's changing. I can see that man's had an influence on it, and it breaks my heart. And what breaks my heart even more is that we're allowing ourselves as Republicans to get branded as not caring about the earth, which just simply is not true. But we're allowing that brand, and we're really, really good at telling you as an environmentalist, what we don't like, and we're terrible about giving you our ideas, right? And so that's what we need to do better. We need to take the offensive and put our ideas out there, because we've got good ideas. Instead of running from this, I want Republicans to go on the offensive with this and join you in throwing ideas out there. And then let's let the best ideas surface up to the top and see what we can do to take care of this earth. I also believe, sorry, you'll get me, you think my last answer was long. Get me going on this one. It's a real mistake. I think there's a number of mistakes that we make here. One of the mistakes that I haven't really articulated well, so let me try to articulate it here, is taking care of the earth is about far more than just global warming. And too often we talk about that as the only thing we're worried about. Well, I'm worried about clean air, I'm worried about clean water, I'm worried about trash in the forest, I'm worried about a lot of things environmentally, I'm worried about public lands and how we use these public lands. And that is all part of environmentalism, but so frequently it boils down to one thing, carbon in the air. And I want to make the discussion broader because I think you could engage more Republicans on the issue if it was a broader discussion as well. Okay, did I answer your question? If you get a minute, go read my speech or listen to it. Oh, yeah, sorry, let me just bring this up. Another mistake we're making is and this is, if I can dare criticize the Green New Deal in front of you.
But just as long as you don't mock it.
I won't mock it, I promise you I won't mock it. It's been marvelous for this in generating discussion and forcing ideas. And this is what Republicans are not doing. We're not putting our ideas out there to be mocked or to be criticized, right? We're not doing it. But it only addresses carbon in the United States. And until we get our global partners engaged, we're going to fail. We could go to 0 carbon emissions in the United States and we'll fail, right? Because we're 10, 15% of overall global emissions. So we've got to figure out how to engage China. We've got to figure out how to engage Russia. We've got to figure out how to engage India to reduce global emissions. And this is, I think, the huge win for the United States. If we're the ones developing the clean technology that they adopt, we will have an industrial revolution type impact on our economy. This is where Republicans are missing the boat, right? If you are nothing more than a greedy capitalist, you should care about being green because there's money to be made.
And guess where ground zero can be placed for that?
United States.
Southeastern Utah.
There you go, exactly, right? And let me just expand that just a little bit to my whole district, right? Some of the brightest entrepreneurs on the planet live in my district. Are you telling me we can't come up with solutions for green technology here in this very district that would change the world and benefit economically those who advance them? And that's the conversation, right, where we can get everybody on board. That's the kind of conversation we're not having that I'd like to have. Okay, let's go here and then Mary, and please raise your hands. Okay, go ahead. Don't hold the mic. There's only one rule here. Don't hold the mic.
Since the football season's about to start, I just want to ask you as a congressman, they have found a way to prevent any one team owner being a capitalist, just buying the best team on earth. There's a salary cap for all the professional teams. Is there a possibility to introduce that concept of a cap on election funding? In other words, that each congressman maybe has the same set amount to use to run for election instead of what it is now, which is unlimited. And it gives America the perception that we're the best democracy that money can buy. So, I mean, is there a possibility?
I wish that I knew what the answer to that was, because being a guy who has to play that game, I hate that game. I hate that game. It's terrible. You talk about a distraction of responding to the president. It's a massive disruption to fundraise. I'm a little bit fortunate in that my district is not an expensive one, but the one right next to me, the Ben McAdams seat, he's got $3 million in the bank. I think before it's said and done, both sides on that are gonna, I'm guessing they'll probably exceed $10 million. And that's for an election every 2 years. So what do you think they do with their time? They fundraise, right? And that, it's just, I totally agree, it's wrong. Now, here's the problem, is the Supreme Court has weighed in on this, right? And so finding a way to do this has been elusive. Most people will agree we should do it. I don't know very many who wouldn't love to see an answer here. I would love to stand before you on my merits of what I've done for 2 years and not how much I've raised. I would love that. I don't quite know how to make that happen. I will tell you this, that personally, although I do fundraise, I at the end of each cycle, when I stand before you for re-election, my goal is that you reflect on what I've accomplished, not what I've spent on my TV ads and things like that. Although we did do a pretty good TV ad, if you saw it. Yeah. Chair, and then we'll go back here. Yeah.
When you were talking about the environment and talking about climate change, this came to my mind is on the Republicans not offering solutions, it's the same thing. This pandemic has shown that having your insurance tied to your job isn't working, that the poor aren't getting the type of medical care they need. And yet all we hear is, let's get rid of the Affordable Care Act, but nothing has ever come forward really to improve it or replace it. And I find that frustrating.
I'd have a good debate with you on the COVID topic, but I will not have a debate with you on the fact that Republicans have wanted to repeal and replace Affordable Care Act, and have not come up with a reasonable alternative. And that is incumbent on us. Now, let me just go on healthcare for a second, and then we'll come back to your question. A lot of times when Congress doesn't act, people get frustrated. But it is the way I've been able to learn that Congress, the way we work, is actually very healthy. We're not intended to go fast, right? That's the nature of the structure. So if you look at the Affordable Care Act, what's happened is Republicans had their shot at repealing it. They failed. Since that time, there have been a number of things that I would say are improvements to the Affordable Care Act. And there are also things in the Affordable Care Act that we have learned that we really want. And the examples I would give you are pre-existing conditions and possibly children being covered for longer. That one's a little bit up in the air, but the pre-existing conditions is now universally accepted by Republicans and Democrats as a good thing. And so I think the federal government is actually morphing this and accepting it more than you can see from your perspective, and that the actual answer was not a one-time removal of the Affordable Care Act, but it was a much more methodical massaging and changing the Affordable Care Act over time to be more and more responsive and to be better than it was when it was put in, which should happen with any legislation.
Congressman, my name is Nick Nichols. I'm the Consul General for Australia. And
Welcome.
I just happen to be vacationing in Moab.
Well, how lucky for us.
A number of Utah companies have invested in Australia. Qualtrics, the technology company, has about 1,000 employees in Australia. And Australian companies have invested in Utah. Rio Tinto, Cord Industries, which is involved with gun manufacturing and sound deadening. And I'm interested in your views about the role of international trade in a COVID recovery. Do you think there should be more or should there be less? And before you answer, Australia welcomes US investment, and we'd love to see more Utah companies invest in Australia as well. But I'm interested in your view on whether a
Excellent.
COVID recovery is...
Excellent. And may I, on behalf of all of us, express our pleasure that you're here and that you chose Moab to vacation, but also to express our appreciation in the relationship that we have with your country. I think it's a very productive, healthy relationship, and so thank you for being here today. I can't talk about this without bringing up China. I'm on the China Task Force. There's 15 members of Congress, and for the last 3 or 4 months, I've had between 3 and 4 briefings a week on China, and some of them have been classified. And it is very imperative, from my perspective, that the U.S. recalibrate, and actually the world recalibrate their relationship with China. Now, notice I didn't say end, or what's the word, decouple. We hear decouple a lot. I don't think that's the answer, but recalibrating is. It's a relationship out of alignment, and you can't talk about international trade without talking about China, right? It's a major player in it. I believe one of the best things the United States has done to improve our relationship with China as it relates to trade is cement deals like the new NAFTA, and improve relationships with our good trading partners. So to that end, we must do better with our good friends in our trading relationships, because if not, then China wedges into that relationship in an unhealthy way. And so I truly hope a post-COVID world includes a really strong trading partnership with our good friends, which clearly your country is one of those. And I do believe that one of the good things about COVID is this: it's forcing many of our purchasing decisions away from China, and people are exploring alternative suppliers and channels that they weren't. It was the easy thing to do to go to China, and that's now changed. It's the hard thing to do to go to China, and I think that's really benefited a lot of our trading partners, and I think you'll see that continue to increase. It's interesting to me to watch businesses. Some have really suffered, and we see that in tourism. Some have really flourished, and we see that in a lot of trade and manufacturing. And I don't know the numbers between our two countries, but I hope that if it did take a dip, that before long we're back up over the top of that and enjoying a really strong relationship with our trade partners. The world is way too past the point of just saying we got to close off our borders and we're going to make everything ourselves and supply everything ourselves. Excellent, good. So have you enjoyed your trip?
Well, it was about 100 degrees when we went yesterday.
And it's about 50 today.
It was about 44.
Can we just hit, Mayor, can we get something in the middle?
I'll work on it for you. Yes.
How long have you been here?
We'll make it warmer. How about
We
that?
don't have a wind.
Yeah, the wind. How long have you been here, and how long will you be here for?
We've been here 24 hours. We'll be here for the week.
Good. You'll see some good weather.
Yeah. And I'm just going back to the trade question. This year is the 15th anniversary of the Australia-US Free Trade Agreement. So I'm wondering whether that's an opportunity in a post-COVID world, whether some of those elements might need updating, particularly in a digital environment.
I sure hope so, because even though 15 years is not a long time, look how different the world is than 15 years ago. And I would tell you, and I think I speak for my colleagues, that we want strong relationships with our good trading partners, and we want to even strengthen them beyond where they are at.
All right, I got one closer question.
Okay, is there anybody who didn't get a chance to ask a question that wants to? Okay, then we'll give Mayor the microphone for the last question.
Well, you're right in saying that tourism has been hit really hard by this pandemic, and we have been exceptionally hit hard here in Moab. We came together as a community and said in March, let's close down, let's stay safe, and we took an economic hit for it. But now we're saying, all right, we're going to stay safe, we're going to stay open, we're going to wear masks like we are all tonight. And so we're coming back. I want to thank you and Congress for the PPP and all of the the CARES Act funding. But I know it's not your toolbox because you're a Fed guy. But I know you have influence. And right now the state of Utah still has money available in recovery. And we need your help because we're trying to paint the picture of how Moab was uniquely affected because of tourism and, visitation. And I just want to illustrate one thing. We were number one, and you never want to be number one in this category, for being most financially affected in the state. And yet, we were almost last in funding.
Because of the formula.
Because the formula was based on population. And so population, Formula One, fine. But we still have money to be spent in the state, and we want to look at the data and see the cities that were most affected, and could we please, have access to those final funds specifically for tourism-based communities like us that were hit so hard. So I guess I'm asking you to be a buddy and an advocate for us, knowing that, it's not your decision, but it is your influence that can help us.
Have I ever said no to anything that you have asked, Mayor?
I don't think so.
I voted for the ERA. Count me in. I'm a buddy. Let's see what we can do. Very good. Hey, this has been delightful. We did one this morning, but my second town hall in person since COVID started, and it's been a really good experience. And I think it shows that we can carry on business if we will follow some very simple guidelines. And hopefully you all have felt safe here today. And I'd really like to emphasize that I think that we can move forward with our lives. You didn't ask about this, but if I could maybe give you all a little update from my perspective, I frequently get asked, so when does this end, right? And the answer to me is when we get a vaccine. That is the game changer. We can wear masks, we can socially distance, but it won't really dramatically change till we get a vaccine. And I'm very optimistic that within, clearly before year end, we'll have a vaccine out there. I think we will have some challenges. Count on some challenges. Think about this. Distributing millions and millions of vaccines. Who gets them? Who decides who gets them? How do they get there? What type of infrastructure do we have for getting these out into the public? And that worries me a little bit that we'll stumble on that, the same way we stumbled on masks, as an example. But I also believe that there is an end in sight to this, and looking forward to that with all of you. Thank you for having me here today, and Mayor, you're the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for coming to the town hall.